Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad. Tehami. Pakistan has formally registered a protest with the US side after the meeting between President Joe Biden and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on 22nd of June. The joint statement which was released after that particular meeting between the two leaders. Now, the US Deputy Chief of Mission was called at the Foreign Ministry and a démarche was made regarding that particular joint statement. Now, the Foreign Office in its statement has said, let me quote, Pakistan's concerns and disappointment at the unwarranted, one-sided and misleading references to it in a joint statement were conveyed to the US side. It was stressed that the US should refrain from issuing statements that may be construed as an encouragement of India's baseless and politically motivated narrative against Pakistan. Unquote. Earlier, the Foreign Office regarding this particular joint statement in response to the queries said that Pakistan had rendered unmatched sacrifices in the war against terrorism, and this particular sacrifice of immense significance has duly been recognized repeatedly by the international community. We also saw a sort of reaction coming from Defense Minister Khaja Asif, who had said Pakistan had lost countless lives in the war on terrorism. Likewise, we saw a response from Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari while speaking at the National Assembly, who said, let me quote, that major powers shouldn't make issue of terrorism controversial and victim of its geopolitics. Unquote. Also, in another major development, we have also seen that Indian President had to face discriminatory treatment during the worship at Sri Jagannath Temple in Delhi. We'll be taking up for discussion in today's show this particular joint statement after the meeting between US President Joe Biden as well as Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the kind of response it has garnered from the Pakistani side, and also the kind of mistreatment towards minorities that is being perpetrated by Hindus in India that is being done under the supervision of Bharatiya Janata Party, of course led by its Prime Minister Narendra Modi. To discuss all this, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Air Vice Marshal retired Ijaz Malik, Senior Analyst. Mr. Ijaz Malik, thank you very much for your time. You. And on Skype at the same time, we are being joined by Mr. Harley Schlanger. He is political analyst associated with Schiller Institute. Mr. Schlanger, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Mr. Malik, if you allow me, let me begin the discussion with Mr. Schlanger. Mr. Schlanger, the kind of joint statement pointing fingers at Pakistan after that meeting between US President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. What's your understanding of this particular joint statement when a certain country which has sacrificed so immensely in terms of losses to human lives, over 80,000 lives lost, and then we saw the kind of the scale and the proportion in terms of damages that was accrued to the economy, being the front line ally in the war on terror. What do you think? What a country who itself had been the victim of terrorism for so long and had to pay such a huge price, when that is being pointed out by specifically when we talk about the US side?
Well, my view on this is that you have to start with the fact that Joe Biden is acting in an extremely reckless fashion right now. What he's concerned with primarily is a regime change in Russia. And he's trying to create a split between India and Russia. And to do that, he's playing into Modi's idea of blaming Pakistan for terrorism. Now, this is the kind of geopolitical game that we've seen over the many years coming from the idea of British geopolitics, of divide and conquer. But at this particular moment, when the situation in the world is extremely tense, we still have unresolved situations with Afghanistan, the so-called Quad agreements that they're trying to get, the military alliance that they're trying to pull India into, and to pull it away from Russia. This is just dangerous. And the idea that you can throw a longtime ally such as Pakistan for the United States, throw Pakistan under the bus in order to appease and appeal to Mr. Modi, just shows the kind of recklessness that Biden characterizes his policies right now.
Right. So what do you think? What are the options that are left at the hands of the Pakistani authorities in these kind of circumstances? We've seen the kind of sacrifices Pakistani nation had to make in order to defeat this particular menace, and very successfully. Our armed forces in Pakistan, the law enforcement agencies here in the country, with the support of the entire spectrum of the nation, broke the backbone of this particular menace already. What are the options, do you think? How should Pakistani authorities be ideally reacting or responding to such unwarranted statements?
Well, I think the statement put out by the foreign ministry is very straightforward and very strong. The question is anybody in Washington paying attention? And is this going to be used by Modi to continue his policy of orienting toward a Hindu nationalism? Now, that's why I think the important thing is to stay calm on this and point out the reality, which is that Pakistan has been a very reliable ally of the United States in dealing with terrorism. And Pakistan itself has paid a price for that. Now, if the United States is treating its allies this way, what does this mean for the other countries that are being brought in, they're trying to bring into an alliance? And let me make one other point here, which is that the potential problem that's still unresolved with Afghanistan is one that the United States needs cooperation with Pakistan to carry out. But I think the U.S. is committing itself to trying to break up the role of China in economic development in Asia. And that's the other factor here, to try to woo Mr. Modi away from Russia and China and make Pakistan one of the sacrificial lambs in that whole strategy.
Right, Mr. Schlanger, your point is well taken. Let me bring in Mr. Malik into the discussion also. Mr. Malik, as Mr. Schlanger has highlighted a very pertinent and a very significant point, there is a sort of a message for those who are coming into alliance with the US at this particular point in history, that the way it is trying to deal with Pakistan, where it's been a long time ally, especially in the war on terror.
Exactly. This statement, and even beyond the statement, the treatment which has been given to Mr. Modi during his recent visit, I think, to me, it appears that America, because of their compulsions and their vision of the geopolitics in this region, vis-a-vis China, Russia, and other countries, including India and Pakistan, of course, they had already given a blank check to India to, take over that role on their behalf. By giving this statement, they have signed that blank check. Now that India can encash. If it wasn't signed previously and it was just given, now they have signed that. And now they are giving that, blanket clearance to India that you can continue, talking or saying or doing anything against Pakistan. We would have no objection to it. And they have, utterly disregarded our sacrifices, be it material or the loss of our almost over 80,000 people that we had given just pursuing the American objectives in this region. And now they have the cheeks to come and say that Pakistan should do more. What else do they want us to do? And I really appreciate the very wisely and very prudently, well-crafted, statements given by our Foreign Office, very well worded, and I think the way they have demarched, it should be appreciated. Plus, on the floor of the Parliament, the statement given by the Foreign Minister and Defense Minister, I think that also needs to be, endorsed and appreciated, because that truly represent the sentiments of people of Pakistan.
Mr. Malik, let's take a little bit of stock of what basically India had been up to when it comes to going for the cross-border terrorism. In this particular statement, just for the sake of reference, One part of this particular statement that relates to it says that joint statement after the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden that they strongly condemned cross-border terrorism and the use of terrorist proxies and called on Pakistan to take immediate action to ensure that no territory under its control is used for launching terrorist attacks. Do you make sense of this, the contents of this particular thing? How do you analyze? I mean, when we talk about the first part of this statement, that they condemned cross-border terrorism, we have seen in the recent past there have been dossiers which have been shared by Pakistani authorities with the international community, especially the United Nations, that how India was itself involved in cross-border terrorism and it was perpetrating through its proxies. And then we had that very solid evidence of Kulbhushan Jadhav also, who was caught red-handed in espionage and sabotage activities. So, I mean, keeping all those things in view, why do you think the US authorities turn a blind eye to what India had been up to and what sort of sacrifices Pakistan had been
just see the situation on ground. The entire line of control with in Indian occupied, illegally occupied Kashmir with Pakistan, it has been fenced by India. It is being surveilled by enormous surveillance drones and other equipment. So, is there a possibility of, if at all it was earlier, there is no possibility for last almost 2 decades that even a bird could cross that fencing and that, you know, under that tight air defense arrangement that India has made. So from where can we, you know, infiltrate into India? Aren't they having their surveillance over their, you know, territorial waters or their international borders? So it is ridiculous to say that. We were trying to, you know, fence the western border as well, because we had the similar issues from western side also. Once the NATO forces were there, it was, you know, why Salalah happened? Who was there? It was, you know, Americans who were trying to support the local Afghans, you know, and making on the pretext of, you know, not recognizing the line which was, you know, dividing us with Afghanistan as international borders. So Pakistan was always of the opinion that give us the wherewithal, we will ensure, you know, border surveillance. And we were, I mean, given the choice at that time, we were NATO allies, we could have very well shared the data also. But they never allowed us, and now they are, you know, offering India not drones but armed drones, and where these armed drones would be used. Although India has, you know, issues with all her neighbors, including China, but they will never do anything against China because they have their, you know, commercial interests with China. While on one side they are, you know, following American policies to contain China, on the other hand they have, you know, multi-billion-dollar trade, mutual trade with China. So where will this end up? This equipment being offered to India, it will be used against Pakistan. So I think we must condemn. This is the least we can do, and we should continue to condemn this, because these just show their double standards against Pakistan, just because we have, you know, we are an, you know, do not fit in with our nuclear status and with our, you know, massive military might in this region, and we are being considered, you know, as a threat to India.
Right, Mr. Schlanger, another part of this particular joint statement after Prime Minister Modi and US President Joe Biden's meeting that relates to the cooperation between the two governments of India and the United States on counterterrorism designations and homeland security cooperation, including intelligence sharing and the law enforcement cooperation. This happens to be the first part of the statement. When we talk about the cooperation on counterterrorism with Pakistan, we have recently seen there were certain statements by the US authorities that they expressed unconditional support to Pakistan in order to deal with the terrorist threat, because there has been a resurgence of terrorism recently in Pakistan. Now, the démarche which was made towards the US side by the Pakistan Foreign Ministry also contains a similar thing of that sort, that counterterrorism cooperation between Pakistan and the US had been progressing well. Now, when we talk about counterterrorism cooperation vis-a-vis the US perspective, Pakistan being a long-time ally, and then we saw the kind of cross-border terrorism India was involved into. So what should we actually believe? Those statements which have been expressing support and unconditional support towards Pakistan, or that cooperation which is being now thought of and carried on with the Indian side?
Well, I think you're making a relevant point. Who can trust the United States right now? And what's the benefit of so-called U.S. counterterrorist cooperation? The United States has, in fact, proven to be one of the supporters of terrorism. You know, I think your viewers know that during the period of the attacks in Syria against the government there, the CIA and special mercenary forces of the United States were working directly with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. If you go back to the Afghan war, you go back long enough, and what you find was that the CIA was arming the very groups, including Taliban and ISIS and Al-Qaeda, that they said they were fighting. The problem here is that if you look at the bigger picture, the United States is trying to portray itself as the sole superpower to maintain control over global economic policy and strategic policy. It's losing that. It's collapsing. The fact that much of the global South has rejected U.S. leadership in the Ukraine war is an example. So what are they trying to do? They're trying to peel back some of that. They're trying to win back India. You know, the idea of offering drone technology and construction of military hardware in India. All of this is a very simple plot to add to the divisions in the global South. And I think one of the things they're afraid of is that Pakistan has a great deal of credibility in counterterrorism. So why would you throw that out the window? Why would you then issue a statement, a joint statement, which seems to imply that you trust the Indian government and not Pakistan? This is why I say it's reckless. It just shows that the United States cannot be a trusted ally. And that's part of the reason the unipolar order of Washington and London is collapsing. And this is an attempt to try and claw it back, to pull India away from Russia and China, away from the BRICS. And you know, my view is that in the long run, this is going to fail because Biden is going to be a failed president. Modi gets a short-term opportunistic benefit from this to be able to use this against Pakistan. But in the long term, this isn't going to help India. So I think this is just another example of a delusional policy coming from the think tanks of Washington, the military-industrial complex, and it's targeting Pakistan as what you might call collateral damage. Throwing out the long-term cooperation that had developed with Pakistan on counterterrorism is just crazy for the United States to do that.
Right, Mr. Schlanger, not only in the counterterrorism domain, when we talk about the war that was waged by the United States and its allies in Afghanistan for almost over 2 decades, for making the two sides, the warring sides, to come to the negotiating table and have that reconciliation process, finally that led into striking that Doha peace deal. That was also done through facilitation for Pakistan. So that's another remarkable achievement Pakistani authorities had contributed to. So despite that fact, it becomes beyond understanding that why such type of statements come from the United States side.
Well, as I said, I think the main intent is to try to appease India and Modi, to pull them away from what's happening in the global South. I mean, if you look at the bigger picture, in the future, India and Pakistan represent two very important countries in cooperation with China, also Iran, Saudi Arabia. All of these countries are moving away from the dollar and moving away from U.S. strategic interests. So do you think Biden has suddenly discovered that India is a great friend and a democratic ally of the United States? No, this is a cynical maneuver. And that's why I say it won't have lasting impact except for alienating Pakistan, which is necessary to continue the fight against terrorism.
Had Pakistan, Mr. Schlanger, I seek your pardon for the interjection over here, had Pakistan not supported or facilitated that peace and reconciliation effort, which finally, subsequently led to the withdrawal of international troops from Afghanistan safely from that war-ravaged country, had Pakistan not played that role, it wouldn't have been possible for the American troops and the international troops to withdraw from there safely. Am I correct?
Pakistan's role in Afghanistan was absolutely crucial. And the problem is that we see what the United States did to Afghanistan after it withdrew. It stole money from Afghanistan. It created a worse situation, which is leading to hunger, collapse of the economy of Afghanistan. So they took advantage of Pakistan's goodwill and good neighbor policy to help end the war there. But then they just left the country in a shambles. And I think that's, to me, that's the message that people should be conveying to Zelensky. The United States doesn't care about Ukraine. It cares about defeating Russia. The United States doesn't care about India. It's committed to isolating China. And that's the kind of cynical geopolitics which ultimately will lead to the demise of the United States as a credible international partner.
Right, Mr. Schlanger, we are honored to have been joined by another participant in the show. Mr. Anwar Iqbal is senior journalist, is joining us on the phone line from Washington, D.C. Mr. Anwar Iqbal, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. What's your understanding of this joint statement after Prime Minister Modi and President Biden's meeting, specifically pinpointing Pakistan, a country which had been long-time ally for the United States? Do you think it was justified by any means to pinpoint a country which had sacrificed on such a huge scale, being the frontline ally in the war on terror with the United States?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I think it was expected. The way U.S. and India relations are going, and the people in Washington feel that they don't need India to counter China's influence, that India probably, American policymakers, including senior officials, defined the U.S.-India relationship as the best relationship in the 20th century that they have had, in the 21st century they have had so far with any country. And therefore, it was always very obvious that they would do anything to further improve their ties with India.
But is it justified?
Now,
if they can go to any extent to,
I don't know. In relations between two countries, you don't need a justification, and there is no morality involved. It's always interest. I think, as the saying goes, which is almost a cliche, but it still is valid, that there are no relations between.
Iqbal, I seek your pardon for the interjection. Perhaps it's not the question of morality. Perhaps if we count this particular relationship or the equation, if it is calculated through the perspective of give and take, Pakistan had given a lot to the U.S. side.
Yes, you're right.
So why can't Pakistan justifiably have that very reciprocation or return? We talk on very practical lines for that matter.
No, it doesn't work that way. We have given a lot, and we may, once again, America may need us in a future arrangement, and when it does, Pakistan will once again become a close U.S. ally. Right now, America does not need Pakistan as much as it needs India, and therefore we see them quoting India. That is how relations among nations work. You go for your needs, you go for your interests, you only protect your interests, and of course, America is a superpower, and it obviously is not going to, as people in Pakistan say, that push aside Pakistan or dump Pakistan. No, Pakistan is an important country, is an important area. Pakistan has borders with Iran, Pakistan has borders with Afghanistan, with China, with India, and therefore Pakistan will always remain an important country. But in the present arrangement, India is more important for the United States than Pakistan, and therefore Washington is trying to get as close to New Delhi as it can. I mean, there is, of course, there is a realization in Washington that India is not Pakistan, that India has its own interest and could only go so far in trying to please Washington. For instance, it did not take the stance that Washington wanted it to against Russia on the Ukrainian issue. India is trying to maintain its relations with Russia as well, and therefore the people in Washington know that when India has to choose one country against another, it will again go for its own interest, and it is very obvious in the Russian case. But so far, people in Washington feel that it serves their interest better to stay close to India, and that's what they're doing.
So no matter how false a narrative India is projecting, as the Foreign Office statement says, that being a state sponsor of terrorism for which there are solid proofs and evidences on the record, and its operatives of the serving armed forces operatives getting caught red-handed within Pakistan in espionage and sabotage activities. And that case going to the highest forum of justice in the world, the International Court of Justice, despite Pakistan giving the solid proofs of India's involvement in cross-border terrorism here in Pakistan, despite all those proofs, despite all those negative propaganda or false propaganda tactics, still the authorities or the policymakers in the US believe that it's in their interest to side by India and by their false narrative?
They don't believe in anything. It's not about believing in something. It's about, it is just like you sit down and you calculate and you come to the conclusion that this option suits you better. Right now, people in Washington feel it suits them better to have a very close relationship with India, and that's what they're doing. There is an appreciation. People do talk for Pakistan. People do talk about the role Pakistan played in the war against terror, in the war against the Soviets in Afghanistan, Pakistan's role in the Cold War, and in other theaters. Pakistan and the Pakistani and American forces have a close working relationship, and I think the Pentagon wants to continue that relationship. So I do not see it as a zero-sum game. A close relationship with India does not mean an end of relationship with Pakistan. US-Pakistan relations will continue, but right now, India will be kept ahead of Pakistan.
Right, Mr. Anwar, one last comment regarding this particular statement. One part of this joint statement after Biden-Modi meeting says that they called upon the Financial Action Task Force to undertake further work identifying how to improve global implementation of its standards to combat money laundering and the financing of terrorism. We saw Pakistan made immense strides in order to getting off from the grey list of FATF just a couple of months before. The implementation of all those relevant laws and the requirements which were set by FATF, all those goals. Now, making this particular thing part of that very joint statement and also linking it with cooperation on counterterrorism designations and homeland security cooperation between India and the United States. So what does this particular linking of FATF with that counterterrorism imply?
Well, this was actually raised, mentioned at the State Department briefing yesterday as well, when the Pakistani journalist asked him about the Georgia statement. Americans mentioned a name that actually links FATF, that actually explains the need to mention FATF in the statement. And the name was that of Sajid Bir. People in Washington say that Sajid Bir was somebody who was first described as a suspicious character, then he was considered dead and everything. But when the FATF pressure was applied on Pakistan, Pakistan got him arrested, Pakistan got him prosecuted, and then he was also imprisoned. And therefore, they feel that if the pressure is built up on Pakistan, Pakistan may perhaps be persuaded to arrest more people who who the Indians they
Now,
have
Mr.
been
Anwar, don't you
involved in
think
the
this
attack.
particular linking implies what I understand from this particular thing is already Pakistani authorities had repeatedly been conveying their concern that India, being the member of the international fora, was trying to, or the organization of such sort was trying to politicize them. So in this particular recent statement, linking this with the counterterrorism operation, urging the FATF to take action and ensure the global implementation of its standards. So, isn't it something that we can understand from that another chance is being given to India to politicize this particular international organization for its own benefits?
Well, obviously, India has been given another chance to use it to bring pressure on Pakistan to go for the people that India wants Pakistan to go after. So yes, of course, it is part of a strategy to bring more pressure on Pakistan. It's very obvious. I mean, there's no denying the fact that the mentioning FATF is meant to increase pressure on Pakistan.
Mr. Anwar Iqbal, senior journalist, joining us from Washington, D.C. On the phone line. Thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Malik, linking FATF, urging it to ensure its implementation of its standards with that very statement of counterterrorism cooperation between India and the United States. Another attempt to let India politicize another international organization,
Exactly.
which it had already done for another time.
Yes. If we just look at the history, ever since 9/11, India has been capitalizing on every opportunity to, capitalize the international sentiment or sensitivity about terrorism. And the obvious objective is to malign Pakistan. So many states sponsored false flag operations. Recently also Mr. Modi quoted about the Mumbai attack and drawing parallels with the 9/11, because they just want to keep all those issues alive which can strangulate Pakistan at some stage. May not be immediately, but at some stage. So that is one attempt. But it doesn't surprise me really what India is doing. What bothers me, how America is endorsing that particular, like America is saying that Mr. Biden said that we have shared democratic values. What values are they talking about? If you see globally what Americans, interest for their oil reserves and the other sales of arms, America is supporting almost every police state and the sheikdoms in the Middle East. Where are those democratic values? So this is the double standard. As our fellow colleague said, there's nothing absolute right or wrong in international relations. Whatever suits somebody, they start saying that. I would like to flag, the issue or the role of media. While Hindustan Times, they are jubilant over, they say this is a landmark statement because it gives a lot of mileage to Indian stars. But fortunately, international channels like Reuters, then of course DW, RT, they have given a good coverage of Pakistan's Foreign Office statements, and if they have not endorsed, at least they have given very candid opinion about that. And even I must quote the Los Angeles Times, a very wide coverage. And one of the journalists asked Mr. Modi that what about discrimination against your minorities in India? And you know what Mr. Modi said, quote unquote, he says that we have always proved that democracy delivers. And then he continued in the same breath, he continued to say, I say deliver, this is regardless of the caste, creed, and religion.
Regardless of the caste, creed, and color, religion, and all that, which is, of course, ensured by the Indian Constitution itself. But on the ground, the situation is quite otherwise.
Different.
That is not what Pakistani authorities say, or any sort of Pakistani.
These are the international opinion makers. These are the international media.
It was even the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom that have urged for 4 consecutive years.
Exactly.
It has urged the State Department to include India into the list of countries of particular
An American
concern.
president is, keeping quiet on that. He's just endorsing, keeping quiet. And then, luckily, some of the foreign policy experts and even the, democracy group within the State Department Office of International Relations, they have definitely, shown their concern. So there are some sane voices also, and Pakistan, I think, must continue. We should not just by demarching or giving few statements. We should continue to, engage wherever we can within the, our available options, and continue to highlight the, importance of Pakistan, the sacrifices Pakistan has given, and and vis-a-vis what India is doing to her neighbors.
Right, Mr. Schlanger, when we talk about this linking of Financial Action Task Force, the kind of the statement, the part of the statement, it is linking it with the counterterrorism cooperation between the United States and India. What's your understanding of it? Is it another attempt to give India leverage to politicize this international organization for its own benefit? The fact which Pakistani authorities have repeatedly previously highlighted.
Well, I agree with what the other person was just saying, that this has nothing to do, the statement and the alliance and the collaboration that was supposedly signed between Modi and Biden has nothing to do with moral principle, nothing to do with the fight against international terrorism or drugs. It's pure hypocrisy. And it's self-serving for both the United States and India. But it's another example, as I said earlier, that countries such as Pakistan have to be very wary about depending on good relations with the United States, because the United States is very likely to throw you off the bus at any point. Now, this idea of giving leverage to India in international organizations on these kinds of questions, it's really a very veiled cover story, because the proof is in the pudding. If you look at the fight against terrorism and stack up India and Pakistan against each other, you'll see that Pakistan has played a much more prominent role and has suffered more losses because of it, and has stood by the counter-terror fight much more than India. So what does this have to do with counterterrorism, with drugs and all these so-called issues? It has nothing to do with it. It has to do pure and simple with Biden trying to protect the status of the United States as the world's sole superpower at a point where that status is eroding. And I think the most important thing that the other guest just said is that Pakistan's foreign ministry needs to keep telling the truth about the Pakistani policy and what Pakistan has done, and make sure that countries in the global south, as well as in Europe, look, in Europe, very few people know anything about this situation. They're assuming that this was a hypocrisy to bring India in on the side of the United States. Several of the German newspapers in the last couple of days have asked the question, given that the United States previously had not allowed Modi to travel to the United States because of his policies in Gujarat, why is he now being treated as a hero? And again, it points out the pure hypocrisy of American foreign policy.
Right, Mr. Schlanger, when we talk about this urgency that has been expressed towards the FATF and then counterterrorism cooperation between the US and India, we saw Pakistan, by the very dint of its hard work and the very strict implementation of the relevant protocols and the laws in the country, was able to get off the grey list just a couple of months before. what sort of an impact this particular joint statement, that urgency that has been expressed towards FATF, might have in the coming months for Pakistan?
Well, my view on this is that the standard that should be applied are the standards of the United Nations. And by that, those standards, whether it's cooperation in counterterrorism, cooperation on economic development, Pakistan is in good standing. The country that's not in good standing is the United States. The United States repeatedly, while asserting that they're defending a rules-based order, has violated international law. And I think that this is when you think about what the big implications are of this meeting and this joint statement, the big implication is that the United States is untrustworthy, the United States is out for itself, and any country that thinks that America is your friend, I would say use the old statement of Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. And if you verify what the U.S. has done, it has not been a reliable ally. And I think if there are any people in India who are honest, they'll tell Modi that this statement from Biden means almost nothing in terms of the development of better relations in the future.
Right, Mr. Schlanger, when we talk about India-Russian ties, we've seen to date, India remains to be the largest importer of the Russian arms. It has purchased Russian oil as well. The S-400 defense system deal with Russia also. Don't you think it happens to be an irritant when it comes to the understanding of the US policymakers and its relationship towards India, knowing the fact that how India is still cooperating with Russia and also hasn't given any very clear position in following the line of the US in condemning what Russia calls as a special operation towards Ukraine?
Well, I think that's precisely why Biden has signed these agreements and is trying to propitiate Mr. Modi, because he's trying to pull India away from Russia. That's not going to be easy to do. I talked with some US military people in the last couple of days, and they said that, look, the United States is going to build a drone factory in India. They're talking about certain other cooperation. It means nothing compared to the long-term relationship between the Indian military and the Russian military and the strategic alliance that India has had with Russia. Now, the real issue here is what you just said, that as long as India, as a leading country in the global south, refuses to condemn Russia's special military operation, that's something that undercuts the authority of the United States. And that's what the target of this communique is. Biden is trying to do everything he can to pull India away from Russia, offering arms, offering other kinds of agreements, big tech connections, and so on. But it's in India's interest in the long run to maintain a kind of neutral position. And I think just the final point I want to make on this, what we're seeing is the potential to realize what began in Bandung in 1955, a real non-aligned movement that does not get caught up in the fight between various power blocks, but actually rejects those fights and instead looks toward a multipolar order. That's what India should be concentrating on. I think that's where Pakistan is right now, looking to multilateralism, moving outside of the dollar. And Biden is desperate to protect the dollar hegemony. And that's what all of this is about in the long run. Has nothing to do with Pakistan not being a reliable ally, because Pakistan has been a reliable ally of the United States. It has nothing to do with India being a reliable ally for the United States, because India has its own interests that don't always coincide with those of Washington and NATO. So I think that's the most important point for people in Pakistan to realize, that this is a desperate gamble by Biden. And in the long run, I don't think it will work.
Right, Mr. Malik, your quick comment regarding why doesn't it bother to the US policymakers or the authorities when it comes to the very close strategic relationship between India and Russia, and also given the fact that India didn't condemn outrightly that special military operation carried out by Russia
Exactly.
against
I think Mr. Schlanger has very, aptly covered that. India was once, a champion of non-line movement, but at the same time they were pursuing in late 60s their defense ties with then USSR. And at the same time, they were pursuing their hardware procurements from the Western sources also. So actually, Americans, they see India as a large economic market. One thing. Second, India plays her cards very well. Indian diaspora has a lot of influence in the policy making and think tanks in United States. So all these dots put together, India manages her own space within the compulsions of the regional politics as well as the global politics.
Right. One quick last comment. How concerned Pakistan should be regarding the transfer of advanced military technologies to India from the United States?
Pakistan must, raise her voice on that and try to, counter. And I'm sure, as our, armed forces, they have their own developmental plan within, of course, the limitation of our, budgetary constraints, and they are mindful of the emerging threats. So we should look for other sources to counter those emerging threats.
Mr. Air Vice Marshal Retired Ijaz Malik, Senior Analyst, thank you very much for being with us on the show today. And on the Skype, we were joined by Mr. Harley Schlanger, Political Analyst associated with Schiller Institute. Mr. Schlanger, thank you very much for your time. Always enlightening to know your thoughtful discussion on this very important topic. We really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.